Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. Our trial coverage continues in Boise, Idaho. This for the trial of doomsday cult mom Lori Vallow Daybell. This is a case that we've been following from the very beginning. Actually, we've been following it since before it even went to trial for the last 4 years. But now we are in the trial of the woman who is charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy, and grand theft, all in connection to the deaths of her daughter Tylee Ryan, her son J.J. Vallow, and her husband's first wife Tammy Daybell. Let's talk about what happened on Wednesday. It marked 1 month since the trial began with jury selection, and the state called Lori's former friend Audrey, who had some pretty shocking testimony for the jurors and for all of us to hear. Our very own Gigi McKelvey joins us from outside the Ada County Courthouse in Boise, Idaho. Gigi, my goodness, this was, some big revelations here. What can you tell us about Audrey Baratiero's testimony?
It was a big day in court. First, I just want to acknowledge the fact that Tammy Daybell would have been 53 years old today. Today is her birthday, and so I just wanted to acknowledge that. But wow, what an amazing morning and afternoon in court. Audrey, who is somebody that I think was a little bit deeper maybe into this group than she let known on the stand, said essentially that when she decided to dissolve the friendship in October of 2019, just shortly after Tammy Daybell's murder, that Lori threatened to murder her, said she would cut her up into pieces, put her in a garbage bag, and bury her where nobody could find her. Lori said, "I'm not in the frame of mind to do that, but I can get myself in that frame of mind." So just very disturbing stuff. Audrey was just sobbing on the stand. She looked like she was paralyzed with fear. And so it was just a big moment. Lori, on the other hand, looked shocked when this came out.
By the way, let's put this into context again. This comment was made after the kids were killed and after Tammy was killed?
Right, because Audrey was in Hawaii with Lori and her niece, Melani Pawlowski, at the time Tammy Daybell was murdered. And then she went back to Idaho with Lori and Melani Pawlowski after they were finished in Hawaii. So she was there during this very crucial time. And Lori, you have to wonder, did she hear something that maybe scared her about Tammy Daybell or the kids or Charles? We just don't know. But for whatever reason, just out of the blue, it seems like Lori, when she realized Audrey was packing up to leave Rexburg and was going to end their friendship, Lori just threatened to kill her, according to Audrey.
Didn't she also say that Lori made a very chilling comment about being present when someone died?
That was something, and it was hard to hear because she was sobbing so hard. But she said something about being at a scene and seeing somebody take their last breath is what I heard. So I'm interested to talk to other reporters and see if that's what they heard too. But it was chilling. And what's interesting to me is that she said that Lori laughed when she turned around. Lori laughed. Now, if you remember on that call with Colby Ryan, he said something to her, and she just gave this really disturbing kind of evil laugh. And so I could just hear it in my head yesterday when Audrey was describing that on the stand.
Yeah, I'm looking at reporting. Lori said to her, "You're so naive, you're so trusting," and made some really bizarre comments that she would bury her where no one would ever find her. Just really, odd comments attributed to Lori Vallow Daybell. Now, let's talk about the cross-examination by the defense. How'd they try to strike at the credibility of Ms. Baratiero? Or Baratiero, I should say.
Went. Right, yeah. So he just went in for the kill. I mean, he just said, you testified in front of the grand jury. You took an oath to tell the truth, and you never mentioned this. So do you expect this jury now to believe this made-up stuff that you just testified to? And that's all he can do is say, well, where was this in the grand jury? She said Lori told her that if you ever tell anybody, I will find you in the dark of night. And it's interesting because at that point, Lori and Chad both were in jail, and we were at a grand jury, but that was how he attacked her credibility, is that you took an oath, and this never came out.
So basically, she was scared to tell the truth because of Lori Vallow Daybell, but like you said, she was locked away. Why would she be scared? I mean, that's an interesting thought to think about. But as incredible as her testimony was, she wasn't the only person on the stand, right? So I understand that a sergeant testified from Fremont County. What did we learn from that sergeant?
It was interesting because it was mainly about the attempt on Tammy as well as Tammy's murder. But what was interesting is this. We have always heard Tammy Daybell thought this was a paintball. She mentions it on the 911 call. And what it is, paintballs have what they call a hopper, which sits on top of that barrel that stores the paintballs. Well, the rifle that Alex might have used in this attempt had a very large scope. So they brought that into the courtroom to show the jury how Tammy may have been confused that this was a paintball gun and not a real rifle. What's interesting is this. That was one of the coldest nights on record in Rexburg. The temperature was like in the wind chill was in the negatives. And so clearly what the witness was getting across, that this gun likely malfunctioned. And then the next day after the attempt, or the failed attempt, he was Googling how to operate AR-style weapons in cold, and then even further was Googling the thickness of a Dodge Dakota car for the metal and the windshield. And guess what kind of car Tammy Daybell drove? A Dodge Dakota. So maybe it looked like he was thinking of switching gears since that first attempt was a failure.
And we know that there was testimony that Lori allegedly said on the night that someone tried to shoot Tammy Daybell that she was on the phone, maybe with Alex Cox, and called him an idiot, or said it after that they hung up, can't do anything right in relation to him maybe failing to kill Tammy Daybell. My understanding is we also learned about Google searches yesterday as well.
We did, and that was part of what we just talked about with the Dodge Dakota, Googling all the thicknesses of the windows, how to keep an AR from kind of freezing up in the cold because it was making clicking sounds, according to Tammy. So he was, and then he also had searched the day of Tammy's murder for those Frog Tog rain pants, the black ones, which was part of the things that he bought. So just things solidifying to the jury that this was Alex Cox, it was premeditated, and where Lori is, there's Alex. You know, it just sort of inadvertently ties her in, but we're still waiting on that big smoking gun tying her to the conspiracy, and maybe we get that today because we have a big witness potentially taking the stand, which is Melani Pawlowski, her niece.
By the way, speaking of Melani Pawlowski, didn't the day end yesterday with the testimony of Ian Pawlowski? Let's talk about who he is in relation to Melani in this case and what he had to say on the stand.
Well, Ian married Lori's niece, Melani Pawlowski, after just a couple of weeks of dating. They met on a dating app. They ran to Vegas and got married right around the time Alex and Zulema did. In fact, Alex Cox walked Melani Pawlowski down the aisle at this very quick wedding. So essentially, he came in very late in the game. It was after the search warrants had been executed, and this was around the time everybody was scattering, but he did wear a wire for the FBI. And so the defense wants to bring in those wires, and we're going to hear arguments before the jury comes in this morning about what, if any, of those recordings can come in. And they're largely about religious talk. There's no confessions to any crimes on there. But I think it's a good strategy by the defense, with mental health not being part of the picture or part of the defense in this case, that they have now used the podcast and now these wiretaps to kind of get in the jury's ear. Her beliefs were way out in left field. These are not normal beliefs. And, you know, could that help sway the jury that maybe Lori wasn't in her right mind? I just think it's an interesting, or it's my speculation of what kind of strategy they're using.
By the way, just going back to Audrey for a second, I'm thinking about her testimony. I'm sort of comparing it to who we've been talking about, people like Zulema or Melanie Gibb, who recounted these kind of odd statements that Lori Vallow made, or the odd behaviors of Lori Vallow Daybell. And it just makes me wonder, if you compare Audrey's testimony to the other people who testified that were close in Lori's life, how significant was her testimony?
You know, I think it just held up right there with Zulema and Melanie Gibb in its own right. It's very damaging stuff because she focused on the fact that she really wasn't physically around Lori as much as like Zulema and Melanie Gibb were, but at the same time, she's still talking about zombies and possessions, and she was in some casting out sessions that she said made her very uncomfortable when they were trying to get the demon out of Charles, and eventually it became Tammy. So I think that it just reiterates and backs up Melanie Gibb and Zulema's testimony about the zombies and the casting out. And her point was, one thing I think was very powerful, she said it became clear to her they didn't want to help these people. They had something further in mind, and I think she was alluding to death. So I thought it was just very, very credible testimony. I think the jury received her testimony very well. They looked sympathetic because she was very upset.
I was going to ask you, what was the jury's reaction to all of this, but specifically Audrey's testimony?
they just take a lot of notes. I haven't seen a day where at least one of them, they're all just constantly, and it's so convoluted. They're going to need these notes when they go back into that deliberation room. But now, it's kind of, you could see the sympathy on their face a bit for Audrey, but at the same time, just writing their notes down so they can keep this straight when it matters most, when they're deciding whether or not Lori's guilty or not guilty.
You mentioned that we may be expecting the testimony of Melani Pawlowski. What can we expect from her testimony?
I think quite possibly she could be the biggest witness in this case. Lori was like a mother to her. Melanie's mother died when she was a young child. She's always kind of idolized Lori, and she was right there in the thick of it all. So I think that she actually was in Hawaii, by the way, with Lori when Tammy Daybell was murdered. So she could be key as to Lori's frame of mind, overhearing conversations, that kind of thing. One thing Ian Pawlowski said on the stand yesterday, because it's a question right now of whether or not she can testify. She may have read some articles about when her ex-husband testified on the stand. But he made the comment, and he said this in court, that Melanie told somebody, and it was not clear who, that the final nail is in Lori's coffin, and her eyes were as big, Lori's eyes were as big as saucers when that was said. So I don't think the testimony is going to favor her aunt, but I'm sure it's going to be very hard for her because she was almost codependent, it seemed, on Lori.
We'll put it this way. In a trial like this, unless there was a scheduling issue why she had to be called as one of the last witnesses for the prosecution, you put your strongest witnesses last. That will resonate in the mind of the jury. So I imagine, I agree with you, this is probably going to be some big testimony. Gigi, I know you have to jump back into that courthouse. Excellent reporting as always. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right, so Gigi's going to go back in. She's going to come back out later for a live update again when the court takes their lunch break, and we'll see what is happening. In the meantime, I am signing off, but don't go anywhere because we're going to head to El Paso County, Colorado for the stepmom murder trial of Letitia Stout, and we'll recap the direct examination testimony of psychiatrist Dr. Dorothy Lewis. We'll be right back.